Sebastian, Gorka in Washington. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you, Stephen.
I want to begin with something you said just 5 days ago. You said the atmosphere here in the White House is absolutely wonderful. We've got a new broom sweeping through the communications shop in Anthony Scaramucci, and we are humming along on all cylinders. Plenty has happened since then. What's the atmosphere in the White House like today?
Fabulous. I literally just left the Oval Office where we swore in General Kelly as the president's new chief of staff. It was like a family gathering, great mood, lots of press interest. So we are very, very excited about recent developments.
Are you? Quite interesting. This is a heck of a family you're living in at the moment. Mr. Scaramucci, whom you so warmly welcomed last week, with his words to the New Yorker, has surely thrown a bomb into the building behind you, the White House.
Not at all. I know that's what our colleagues on the Hill, on the left, and in the chattering classes of the leftist media would want people to believe. But it's not at all like that. Look, we don't live in the rarefied bubble of pablum and boilerplate and obsessing about things that aren't real, such as the Russia collusion delusion. We have a job to do. The president in the last 6 months has achieved things that most presidents don't achieve in years. If you look at immigration, the economy, we broke a historic record for the stock exchange just in the last 2 days. So the fact is, we are excited. The agenda, Make America Great Again, is working. We've strengthened the team. We have people who can communicate to the base that elected this president in the form of Anthony. And we have a 4-star general who in 6 months turned the Department of Homeland Security around, made the illegal migration across the southern border drop not by 10%, not by 50%, but by 73%. And we're just going to keep on going forward, whatever our detractors wish to say.
What Anthony Scaramucci said, and of course he preempted the departure of Reince Priebus, was that the chief of staff at the time, since gone, was let's bleep it, a bleeping paranoid schizophrenic. He said the chief strategist in the White House was pursuing his own brand, and used a sexual euphemism that I can't repeat to suggest that he was somebody that Scaramucci did not rate in the slightest. He also suggested that other White House staffers in the communications shop, as you call it, would have to take lie detector tests because he was going to bleeping kill all the leakers. That suggests to me that this is the most deeply dysfunctional White House team I can possibly imagine.
Then how do you explain the results, Stephen? I mean, literally, we have had 24 weeks in a row of stock market breaking records. We've seen illegal migration plummet. We've seen NATO revitalized. We've seen 800,000 jobs, actually almost 900,000 jobs.
With respect, none of those pieces of data.
How is that possible?
Well, none of those pieces of data reflect my question at all. I'm asking you how we can regard the White House as anything other than deeply and profoundly dysfunctional today.
Because it isn't. I mean, look, if you want to persist in harping on about fake news concepts of what's going on in the White House, I actually work inside the White House, and I'll tell you, there is no crisis, and we are creating the results that are expected of us and which got the president elected. So, you can live on that illusion if you wish, but look at the track record.
Yeah, it's not.
The two things
I'm going to look at the track record, but I want to take seriously what your director of communications said. He said, for example, that he would get lie detectors in to find out who was leaking from inside the White House. Have you faced yet the prospect of taking a lie detector test?
Well, I don't work for the comms shop, so I work for the chief strategist, Stephen Bannon. And I don't really wish to comment on what I think was meant to be a private conversation between Anthony and this reporter that the reporter clearly recorded. It's just sleazy journalism. It's just unseemly. So, we have a leak problem. If you look at the congressional report from last week, we have had 125 leaks in 126 days. We've had 62 of them have been deemed by Congress to be of national security import. That is a problem that will be dealt with, not primarily by Anthony. His remit is the comm shop. But when you have a four-star general like General Kelly come in, the chief of staff is responsible for things such as discipline, and these things have to end because it is bad for national security.
Well, with that in mind, just one more question about the teamwork and the way the logistics works inside the White House. Anthony Scaramucci made it very plain that he reports direct and personally to the president. Now, he said that at a time when Reince Priebus was still chief of staff, and it was clearly, frankly, some kind of a comment on his relationship with Reince Priebus. But to the best of your knowledge, is Scaramucci still going to have that direct personal route to the president, or as in most presidencies, is the new chief of staff going to be the gatekeeper who controls all access by others to the president?
So the chief of staff was literally sworn in about 52 minutes ago. So he is setting in place the procedures by which he will run the White House internally. Where Anthony fits into that, you'd have to ask General Kelly or talk to Anthony. But let's give him more than just 52 minutes and find out later in the week.
Let's talk about the relationship between the White House and the US Congress. Would you accept that on a series of different matters, from the failure of a key plank of Mr. Trump's policy agenda, that is the repeal of affordable health care, so-called Obamacare, to the congressional reaction to Mr. Trump's comments about the Attorney General, the Republicans in the US Congress are deeply out of sympathy with and alienated from Donald Trump today?
No, I'd look at it significantly differently. You call the president a disruptor. In many cases, he is. He's a positive disruptive force in Washington, and that's why we call the Washington the swamp. The thing that has to be remembered is that he may have been formally the GOP, the Republican candidate for president, but Donald J. Trump was not an establishment individual. Think about the fact, the first time since 1776, first time in American history, we have a president of the United States who has never served in public office before, not even as a governor, and has never held senior military rank like Eisenhower or Washington. First time ever. Now, Stephen, why do you think that is? Because the American people are fed up with the establishment writ large, including the GOP, left and right. They look at the last 20 years and they say, you haven't served us well, whether it's wars in Iraq, wars in Afghanistan, the state of the economy, the bloated government, the fact that if you get a job in government, it's a job for life. The president is not from the establishment. As a result, members of the establishment GOP will probably have problems with him, but if you're surprised, then you haven't watched his campaign or who this man is.
Interesting analysis, but if I may suggest, one of the reasons the GOP, the Republican Party, is so concerned about Donald Trump's first 6 months is that his approval rating is at historic lows. Politicians look at the polls and whatever you say about the markets, and indeed it's true, the market's high, unemployment's low, but the bottom line is, even with the economy performing well, Donald Trump is historically one of the most unpopular presidents after 6 months in the entire history of the United States.
Stephen, are these the same polls that said Brexit wouldn't happen and Hillary would become president? Are you talking about the same polling companies?
I'm talking about the way the Republican Party is reacting to the popular disapproval of Donald Trump.
But what do you base that popular disapproval on? Polls that also predicted there would be no Brexit and that Hillary Clinton would win? Those polls?
You better ask the Republican politicians, because I'm going to quote to you the sorts of politicians like, for example, Chuck Grassley, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who've looked at the way Donald Trump has hung out his Attorney General to dry, calling him very weak, saying he's deeply disappointed in his beleaguered Attorney General. And Chuck Grassley says, this is wrong, and if you even think about firing him, we in the Senate will thwart your attempts to appoint a successor.
That's what I think is the problem with the establishment on the Hill. They don't understand. So last Tuesday, I flew with the president to Youngstown, Ohio, where he had a rally. And you should check out the footage of that rally. This is in Steel Valley. This is where all the factories were closed down because of outsourcing and other issues in the last few decades. Now, we're talking about a political type rally, a presidential rally, more than 8 months after election. 8 months after an election, and the atmosphere was electric. They barely allowed the president to talk because they were chanting so much for his agenda, make America great again.
But Dr. Gorka, I did not.
I need to finish, Stephen. I'm going to finish. I need to finish.
Yeah, but I didn't for 1 second suggest that Donald Trump doesn't still have passionate supporters. That is not the point I was making.
But I need to make the point that the polling that you are referring to has become like phrenology. It's a fake science. The few pollsters that actually do a job and don't have D+10 samples that oversample the Democrats in their polling, like Rasmussen. Rasmussen just established a poll, just published one last week, where they have 70% of the American populace are finally optimistic and happy in their general situation and their expectations. Now, how is that possible, Stephen, if they're displeased with the president?
Well,
how
if you
can
want to,
the majority...
you're shifting the ground because, first of all, you dismissed polls. Now you want to trade polling data with me. If you want to trade data with me, I can quote you 10 polls where he is at a historic low.
Serious. One of the few that gets it right.
Yeah, you can make your point about polls, I'll make mine. But the bottom line is this. If you take the reaction of the Republican Party, both to his treatment of a Republican Attorney General that he appointed, Jeff Sessions, and if you also look at the failure of his signature policy platform pillar, that is to repeal Obamacare, you look at a president who after 6 months cannot get the support of his own party in the US Congress.
Yeah, because the establishment doesn't understand what happened on November the 8th. So let's be clear here. You said Obamacare repeal and reform was a signature platform of his administration. Not correct. It was very important, but the signature, the three-part platform on which a billionaire real estate magnate from New York became the most powerful man in the world, was to revitalize the economy, to build the wall and defeat ISIS. That's the tripartite platform, and we are going to make those things happen. With Obamacare, the president, in recognition, I mean, really, you have to doff your hat to him, in recognition of the checks and balances and division of power in America, said, okay, GOP on the Hill, Congress, I'm going to let you lead the way on Obamacare reform. Why? Because they've been talking about it for 7 years, Stephen. Not the president. The president's been in office for less than 7 months. These people have said for 7 years, we will repeal and we will reform. And when he says, gentlemen, lead the way, what happens? They failed. Not Donald Trump. The Republicans failed. And now they're trying to make it look as if this is Donald Trump's fault. It isn't.
Well, I think you're making my point that there is now a profound rift between the president and the controlling party in both houses of the U.S. Congress. So let's move on from that and let's talk about the impact of the continuing extensive federal investigation into those allegations that Russia meddled in the U.S. presidential election and further allegations that there may have been collusion with senior people in the Trump campaign. The investigation is digging ever deeper. How on earth?
And finding nothing.
How do you know?
What do you mean, how do I know?
Well, how do you know they're finding nothing? Are you privy to Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation?
10 months of hysteria, and nobody, not one individual, can point to one illegal act. Not one. Now, isn't that strange?
But hang on a minute. Robert Mueller's not been working for more than a few months. How on earth do you know that he's not finding incriminating evidence?
All I know is that the bubble, the media especially, have been obsessed, dossier this, collusion that. It's just absurd. Have you ever heard of a news story that for 10 months is predicated on some form of illegal action, but for almost a year has found none? Don't you find that strange? I think it's fascinating that just last week, Chuck Schumer from the Democrats has started to admit, you know what? Hillary lost the election, and it really wasn't about Russia. It really wasn't about Comey. When the Democrat Party is starting to give press conferences that are saying, we need to look in the mirror finally, because we haven't, this is very good.
If I may say so, as far as I can understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is nothing to do with who actually won the election. It's a question quite specifically of what the links were between Russian interference, which the FBI and the intelligence agencies are 100% convinced happened, but the connections between that Russian interference and senior people in the Trump campaign. Now we know, because of revelations in the New York Times, which were then backed up by email evidence, we know that Donald Trump's son and Jared Kushner had a meeting in June 2016 with a lawyer who had clear contact with the Russian government. And Donald Trump took that meeting knowing that it was designed to give dirt on Hillary Clinton. That is a profound problem for your president.
No, it's not. It's not. After the statement made by Jared Kushner last week, the superb statement he gave outside the West Wing, after the testimony he gave behind closed doors in Congress, the thing is dead in the water. You've got to read how the New York Times, CNN are now distancing themselves from this story because they realize it's a massive nothing burger. At the same time,
who doesn't believe it's a massive nothing burger, and that's Donald Trump himself.
I do. Who?
Donald Trump. Donald Trump himself tweeted, "I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director." He calls that a witch hunt, but Donald Trump himself feels that he is under investigation, and that surely is not a nothing burger.
Yeah, let's stick to one thing at one time. Okay, so you mentioned this meeting in Trump Tower long before the hysteria of Russia began. That meeting was requested by a music promoter as a favor. The woman misrepresented herself because she said she had some politically relevant information on Hillary Clinton. Turned out she didn't have any, and then she switched the conversation immediately to the question of adoption laws between the US and Russia. At that point, Donald Trump Jr. ended the meeting because it had been requested on false pretenses and nothing further happened. At the same time, Hillary Clinton is embroiled with Russia up to her neck. Why? Because the DNC, the Democrat National Congress, actually sent one of its consultants not to collect dirt on the Trump campaign,
you know what?
sent, I'm going to finish this, Stephen, sent their own operative to the embassy of a foreign nation, Ukraine, not just to collect dirt on the Trump campaign, but to coordinate an attack.
And Dr. Gorka, those accusations we will put in our next interview with a representative of the Democratic Party. You are here representing the White House. And I just put it to you that when Robert Mueller has expanded his investigation to look at business ties between the Trump organization and Russia going back years, your president has a profound problem that is not going to go away. And you can call it a nothing burger as much as you like, but this is a burger with meat on it.
It doesn't even have tofu, I'm afraid, Stephen. It is an irrelevance. There is nothing there, and they can spin their wheels for as long as they like.
If I may say so, the arrogance of an assistant to the president who can say there's nothing there when you have no idea what Robert Mueller is collecting. No idea at all.
No, it's not. You can insult me on television, but I actually work for the President of the United States. And when he tells me that there's nothing there privately, and when Jared tells me there's nothing there, you know what? I'm going to actually trust my employer. You can insult me, but I will entrust the man elected to be the President of the United States. And if you don't like that, you should look in the mirror and not insult your guests.
No insult intended, simply an observation.
Then don't call me names on television.
Simply an observation that whatever you tell me, you cannot know what Robert Mueller is discovering.
But I know what the President of the United States told me, and that's enough for me, because I trust that man.
And
I have no connections to Robert Mueller, and I trust the President of the United States.
Understood.
And for you to insult me is really, really churlish and unprofessional.
Your absolute trust in Donald Trump very plain. Let us move on to issues of national security, because of course that's what you're paid to do, advise the President on issues of national security. North Korea. Donald Trump has issued many tweets telling North Korea it must desist from this missile test program. The North Koreans are clearly not listening. Donald Trump now says it's China's fault because China is not using the influence it should. So what does the US do now?
Well, the first thing we do is we don't give our playbook away. That's the Obama administration, where they'd actually tell you in advance what they're going to do. For example, when we're going to go into Mosul, when we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We don't tell regimes like North Korea what we're going to do next, because that's bad when you're playing poker and very potentially dangerous when you're talking about geopolitics. All I can tell you is that since the Mar-a-Lago summit, after which we had high hopes of Beijing exerting pressure on North Korea, we wanted to implement a program of peaceful pressure with our allies, with our partners, with the UN Security Council. It is now clear that that is not functioning. It's not bringing the results. There is continued escalation by Pyongyang, and now we're going to look for alternatives. But I'm sorry, Steve, I'm not going to tell you on BBC what we're going to do next.
No, but just the UN ambassador representing the US, Nikki Haley, said the time for talk is over. So we have to assume there are specific actions in the pipeline that we're going to see very quickly.
You may assume that, yes.
Let's talk about your special subject. You came into the White House with a long record of writing and working in think tanks with a clear position saying the United States is at war with radical Islam and all other foreign policy issues have to be secondary to that. Would it be right to assume you were an advocate of ripping up the nuclear deal with Iran?
I agreed with the analysis. I worked with General Flynn in the transition after the election, and then I came into the White House to work for Mr. Bannon, and I completely agree with the analysis we had back then. The JCPOA Iran deal is disastrous. It does not stop nuclear acquisition by Iran. It simply delays it, and in fact, it's such a weak deal that it doesn't really delay them at all. Not only that, the JCPOA Iran deal is utterly disconnected from every other destabilizing action they take in the region, and as a result, bad deal.
And yet the Trump administration has just certified that Iran is respecting that deal. And if I may say so, looking across the piece at where we sit with the struggle against IS, well, we've seen IS push back in Mosul. They look like they're going to be pushed back in Raqqa too. But you could make a strong case for saying the one country that's benefiting most from the dynamic in the Middle East at the moment is Iran. So given your long record of saying the Iranians are at the heart of the threat to the United States of America, I'm struggling to see how the strategic position in the Middle East today, as furthered by United States policy, is actually helping US national security.
I've never stated ever that Iran is the heart of the threat to the United States. In fact, I've said that we've inherited a world on fire. Thanks to the Obama administration's idea of leading from behind and strategic patience, wherever you look in the world, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Iran, whether it's North Korea, we inherited a maelstrom. But when it comes to the jihadist threat to America, I concur with Bibi Netanyahu when he addressed Congress and he said, all you need to know about the Dantean Inferno that is the Middle East and North Africa is that it is a game of thrones for the crown of the caliphate. We have two different versions of that caliphate. We have the Sunnis, such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the extreme Sunni vision, and then we have the mullahs in Iran that have their Shiite version. These are not mutually exclusive threats. They both pose a threat to America, to the UK, and to the whole civilized world.
Sebastian, Gorka, I wish we had more time, but we don't. I have to end there. Thank you for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.